Hello there, my fellow hootlings, and welcome to another episode of Game Lore versus Mythology. I am here with Mɪআপোsᴛʀᴏ Tဃᴇʀɪᴘᴘyy.
Hello there, my fellow hootlings, and welcome to another episode
By
of
the way, you have an echo, Mɪআপোsᴛʀᴏ.
Game Lore versus Mythology. I am here with Mɪআপোsᴛʀᴏ Tဃᴇʀɪᴘᴘyy. Hello there, my fellow hootlings.
Oh,
Hello there, my
Yeah, you have an echo.
yeah, no, I'm a retard. I forgot to mute server sound. That's all me, chat. That's how I fucked up. I have the chat open so I can see everyone, and I totally whiffled it. Awesome.
But yeah, it's another episode of Lore in Games versus General Mythology, and today we are predominantly discussing orcs.
Awesome. My favorite race of all time. Okay. So to start off the conversation with orcs, we need to separate the orc race into two separate mythologies and two separate presentations in media and in games. The first is orcs are pig related, which if you guys are familiar with Slime Tensei, that's the most relevant new media that shows orcs in their original form. Now, the first time that orcs are mentioned in mythology goes back to the ancient Persians. Then they were a pig race of mutants, basically. And what happened was because they ran afoul of the wrong deity, they got mutated into pig people. They were once humans that worshiped the wrong god, and that's basically where orcs come from. Now, there's a separate strain of orcs where orcs are part of the green skin cacophony with hobgoblins, goblins, and their shamanistic nature. Because the first stream that we did on this was mostly about goblins from my conversation and where goblins came in. Well, orcs technically aren't a green skin race. That is a new media that's happened in mostly in fiction. If you look at mythology, orcs are incredibly boar related. I'm yelling.
Not to mention also the J.R.R. Tolkien version where they have been basically where orcs are enslaved humans and elves.
No, in J.R.R. Tolkien's version, very specifically, those are corrupted elves.
Yes.
The corrupted humans are Uruk-hai, and they are genetically superior to the orcs or goblins. Because Tolkien unfortunately uses orc and goblin interchangeably, and most of the time they're not. They very rarely are, as a matter of fact. That's one of the weird things that Tolkien did. Most of the things that Tolkien came up with were absolutely amazing. Wraiths, for example, did not exist in mythology prior to Tolkien's books. Just a thought. Like the entire concept of wraith comes about because of the Hobbit books. Otherwise, they don't exist anywhere. The closest thing to a wraith is a revenant. But even then, that's very specific. And it's not the same thing. So as far as orcs go, that's what I meant by there's a change in the view of orcs, where orcs become almost a green skin race. And before that, they never were. Before that, they were very piggish, to the point where in many mythological stories, they don't have hands. They have cloven hooves for hands. It wasn't until the Persians ran into the Greeks hardcore, specifically around about 1000 or so BC, after the establishment of the Minotaur Minos myths, that orcs become fully humanized in Persian mythology. And they don't really show up in Asian mythology at all. Like the closest thing that you get to an orc in Asian mythology is a downgraded version of an oni or ogre. And then you're looking at a corrupted or weakened ogre that's like half ogre because it's mixed with human and it has weird animalistic traits. But yeah, no, I mean, for the most part, they're very, very pig-like. That's why I brought up Slime Tensei. In I Was Reincarnated as Slime, they specifically show ancient orcs, how orcs were. And it's fantastic because I haven't seen that in media for most of my life. The majority of orcs that you see, there's some creation of greenskin. And this goes across games. So, like, for example, if you look at the Warhammer games where they make them a fungus creature, right, they're still a greenskin. If you look at World of Warcraft, orcs are almost human. The only thing that makes them non-human is that they're bigger and stronger than the humans. But compared to the rest of their faction, they're pretty much the most humanist people there. I mean, the trolls are kind of second, but the trolls are a natural as Ronian wraith. I mean, you look at like the Elder Scrolls, for example, they've taken it to the point with orcs, where orcs are just a different type of mer.
Oh yeah, in Elder Scrolls, there's even a whole wiki just on the lore of orcs in Elder Scrolls alone.
Well, yeah, but I mean that lore is rather complicated and complex. The point I was bringing up, though, is that in that they're called Orsimer, and they're a type of mer. They're not even a beast race like the Argonians or the Khajiit or the Slodes.
Yeah, Orsimer or pariah folk.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the small strain of the Orsimer that weren't corrupted when Boethia ate Trinimac and spat out the remains that were Malakath. But that's a long, involved bit of lore.
Oh yes, it is.
But I mean, you know, yeah, there's a plethora of games that you can look at, and in almost every single one, the orcs are very humanistic.
I can list a few actually. There's Orcs Must Die, which has a sequel. There's Of Orcs and Men. There's Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. There's Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. There's Orcs and Elves. Warcraft, World of Warcraft, Warhammer 40k. There's plenty of Orcs games.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But a better example of what I'm going for is like if you play Dungeons and Dragons, or if you get into at least the Monster Manual of Dungeons and Dragons, the orcs that are presented there, the only pig aspects that orcs have is their nose. It's a weird mix, but it's a green skin with a pig nose. That's the big thing about orcs that they kept for the original mythology.
Oh yeah,
which is pretty fascinating if you think about it, because there's no reason for them to have a pig nose if they have green skin and the tusks and everything. Like the tusks in and of itself have completely been detached from their boarish nature. It has nothing to do with them being, you know, of pig ancestry at all. It's just part of what determines that they're that. And for example, like the orcs in The Witcher, for example, which are a Tolkien-style orc where it's like goblins and orcs are interchangeable. Those things are more goblin-like than they are orcs because they're very, very tiny.
Oh, yes.
I'm rakist. I did not know that there were actual Japanese orcs. The only ones that I've heard of, are like decreased ogres. So I don't know quite what you're referring to, but then again, when it comes to like Eastern mythology, that is my major weakness. I'm not that familiar with the difference between like Japanese or Korean mythology. I don't know the fucking difference. I'm sorry. Like in that, I'm just a white dude on the internet from America.
Well, another way to actually translate orc is into oni, which could be also mean troll or demon, whichever way you want to take it.
Yeah, well,
it's a kind of yokai, which basically just means supernatural demon. And there are Japanese orcs. Definitely.
No, I'm not saying that there's not. It's just that in this regard, I'm probably gonna fall on my face a bit because I'm not familiar enough to speak with absolute authority. When it comes to like goblins or undead, I absolutely am, because like Eastern undead is amazingly fascinating in how it works, because Eastern undead for the most part are revived via charms. Where if you look at the difference there between like how it's done, it's the entire presentation of magic is different between East and West. And as far as orcs go, I really haven't heard that many myths about them. Like most of the myths that I've heard coming from the East are demon/ogre related, oni related. And like that's a very, very different thing.
Yes.
So I mean, that's one of the things I find amazing, because like, you know, you get into games, for example, and in almost every game, they've humanized them to such an extent that it's very, very different in like how it reads. Like if you go back and read some of like if you read the story of Gilgamesh, which is pretty much our first written story ever, which you could pretty much find every story in. It's got your standard hero myth because it's what made the standard in that regard. You run into orcs, and orcs are absolutely pig related. Like
Gilgamesh, wasn't that the warrior hero?
Oh yeah, no, he becomes a god.
Mm-hmm.
Like he ascends to deity-ness. Like it's from what you hear in a lot of the Herculean myths that you hear came 800 years after Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh isn't technically a Persian myth. Gilgamesh is actually a Neo-Assyrian myth left over from the oral tradition from the Assyrian Empire. And like, you know, those people were so brutal and terrible that they made the Persians look good. But the story of Gilgamesh still stays on because there's so many things in that. You know, he goes off on an adventure. You know, on this adventure, he discovers that, you know, he is not nearly as capable as he once thought he was, because he might have been the best in his region. But the minute that he gets out of his region or his kingdom, which is a city-state, he immediately gets his ass whooped because he's not that good. The world's a big place. And the story of Gilgamesh is amazing because, you know, he actually gets his broad axe that he gets is actually recovered or made by an ogre, depending on the translation. And depending on the translation, he either helps or kills the orcs that are following that ogre. And the amazing thing about that myth is that those ogres aren't even really Western ogres. They're more Eastern ogres in their presentation. They have massive horns, and they're almost humanistic. They're pretty bestial, but they're much more human than a lot of the creatures in mythology at the time. Because like at the time, like harpies were described as human female-ish, but that's only because they were described having breasts and the upper torso of a female form. Whereas you see harpies now in almost any presentation. Number one, they're almost, you know, angelic in their presentation. You know, they have wings on their back, or, you know, they're hardly ever using the arm wings. They're hardly ever, you know, having their hands remodeled into wing forms. Like it's really strange. Like, and even the claws and the bird feet for the most part are restricted down to the ankle. Like whereas in the original presentation of harpies from Persia and ancient Greece, you're looking at things that are completely covered in fur. You know, the only part
or also the depiction where the thigh area is all feathery and fluffy, while from the kneecap down you have these eagle-like talons feet.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Like that's
I remember those old school ones the best.
Yeah, well, that's part of it too. Is the fact that like this very female-looking form that you see in Japanese animation or that you see in Western illustrations is nothing like the mythology at all. And you get into the mythology of harpies, like the way that harpies reproduce is that they find a guy by themselves and eat their genitalia, and that allows them to you know, emit an egg, a fertilized egg. Like that's how they did it. They eat your nutsack live and raw, and that's how they somehow reproduce. Whereas, you know, in modern tellings,
my goodness,
you see completely, you know, seraphim levels of harpies where their wings are on their back, or they're humanized to the point where the entire torso and, you know, knee up area is all human. It's not covered in feathers. It's not. Yeah.
For me, the classic harpy, the only humanoid feature of a classic harpy, in my opinion, is that they have breasts. Whether they be covered or not is insubstantial. But that they also had a very female-like face.
But that's modern. That's modern. That comes back to also
with beak.
Well, yeah, but see, yeah, that's the thing. Like harpies had fully beaked faces.
Other than that, they would be fully bird.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. See, that's a mixture of the ancient mythology and some of the more romanticized tellings when they, you know, around the 3rd century or so when they went back and translated a lot of the ancient Greek. And one of the things that they did is to get around the fact that, you know, so many people in ancient Greece are in hell. They decided to substantiate the Elysian Fields section of Christianity, where like the first circle of hell is paradise for everyone who was born prior to becoming a Christ. Like that's around that time where all of the ancient creatures got completely remastered. The original telling of the Minotaur, there's nothing humanoid about him at all. The only humanoid thing about him is his hands. That's it. The rest of him is entirely covered in animalistic features. He's got a tail. He's got cloven hooves. He's basically a demon. But, you know, he's nothing. He's more almost like a torrent than anything else from World of Warcraft. Like, that's a closer example of what the Minotaurs were in history. You know, but we brought up Elder Scrolls Online. Like, if you look at that, the Minotaur's only major difference and advantage over humans is they're bigger. Like, and they have bull-like heads. That's it. Like, they use human arms and armaments. They use human weapons. Like, that's not what the original Minotaur needed because it was so brutally overpowered. It had absolutely no reason to have to use anything other than an axe because that was just for overwhelming power. You know, I mean, they also did get into the fact that Minotaur's favorite food was, you know, was your skull, like your brain, quite literally. They were almost zombies in that aspect.
Oh yeah, for me with Minotaurs, the classic way of their looks would be fully bull with human arms, occasionally a bare human chest, and that they were walking upright. Other than that, they were fully bull.
Yeah. Well, again, though, I mean, I think it's because of your love of actual history and the mythology and the myths behind these creatures for that appreciation. Most people like a very humanized Minotaur. Again, it's this weird thing in modern fiction. Like, I don't understand why, for the most part, every single monstrous race is presented as humanoid as possible. Like, that's what made them scary. Like, what the upgrade from a goblin to a hobgoblin wasn't just size. It was the fact that it was humanized. It was the fact that it could think, it could rationalize, it could talk, it could fully use tools. You know, believe it or not, Trio, a lot of people do. Like, not a lot of people like seeing a torrent, believe it or not. A lot of people, if they're playing an avatar or are involved in any sort of three-dimensional space, want to play something that closely resembles themselves in a way. That's part of the problem I see with this. That's why things like, you know, Goblin Slayer, which is your standard like R-rated terrible, you know, D&D campaign where it's just like we are going to bring monsters back to what they are, is panned so negatively. Like, goblins weren't nice. Like, goblins became nice in around the 1950s. Honestly, like that's where modern
even during that time. There were still stories in, well, there were still being written books about house goblins stealing everything, and even though they were starting to nicify things, if that's even a word, there were still stories about how they were bad. But nowadays, you are completely right.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I find so compelling about Goblin Slayer. I don't find the actual main character that compelling. Realistically, the only thing I find exciting about him is that he's actually following through a Slayer problem. Because that's again an East-West thing. Like the title of Slayer in the East has a great deal more historical significance than it does in the West. It'd be much more like a wolf hunter, for example, in Western mythology, like what those were and how those worked. But you would apply that to like Goblin Hunter and have it be like that. The major issue with that, though, for me, isn't necessarily the character. It's just the fact that I haven't seen a gritty story where no one is good. The good guy himself is a psychotic, murdering bastard, and I find that engaging just because it's not that prevalent. Yeah, again,
I will have to interrupt you with one thing, though. as of this year, I am starting to also give out the wrench to people that are often in the chat. So people will be getting wrenches.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, hey Prince, what's up, buddy? Yeah, no, as far as that goes, yeah, no, I get that aspect. I was talking more about the layer of the character where there is not that much about him that is compelling. I don't find that engaging. What I find compelling about it is the fact that they show, goblins being horrible things. Like there's a reason why they were monsters, besides the fact they're not human. Like that there was an entire underlying mythology as to what these creatures were, not counting the fact that humans could be degraded into monsters by their own action. So again, going back to Persian mythology and talking about orcs, the second retelling of the Neo-Assyrian stories about orcs and Gilgamesh, orcs themselves become like the line from Goblin Slayer, where if you become a vengeful, spiteful, or gluttonous person, you degrade your soul and become an orc. The same way if you're a lying, thieving, type of person, you degrade yourself and become, it doesn't translate well, but it's basically goblin. Now, I can't fucking pronounce it because, it's got a lot of L's where they don't belong. And I have a major issue with that particular type. Persian is a dead language anyway, but in that particular aspect, like these things were brought as a comparison as why you did not want to engage in these activities or do these things, because if you did, you would become this ugly, disgusting monster. Like the most recent example that I can bring of this effect is in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, how she describes the monster. There's a reason why he rapes the corpse of the wife that he kills and the daughter that he eats and rapes. There's a reason he does those things. There's a reason why he molests children. There's a reason why he defiles corpses and bodies of other people. Like all of that is to present how awful and horrible he is. And Mary Shelley did a great job of going back to the original mythology for monsters when she was creating a new one, because she wasn't using a zombie, she was creating something new and used all of the traits of standard monsters and applied them to this new creature, and that's part of why it's stuck.
Yeah.
Thinking of hopping on Warframe, but I also saw that Even Hand brought someone into our Discord.
So sorry,
I think your mic is picking up your companion there.
Yeah, no, my brother's here and his volume is triggering my mic, unfortunately, because I got the gains tweaked so that way it picks up voice appropriately, which means now it picks up every voice and no other background sound, which is fantastic. Oh yeah, I'll try to calm down.
Oh shit. Nice.
Yeah. But no, when in monster myths, especially about orcs, like one of the amazing things about them, I've mentioned Slime Tensei, is the fact that orcs, unlike every other monster, are truly omnivorous, and that's what made them so scary.
That's also another part of why they're pig-like. Pigs eat absolutely anything.
I'm sorry, what? That's why they're so what?
Pig-like.
Oh yeah, well no, that's picking up on their pig-like characteristics and pushing it to the extreme, because it depending on the region and the myth. So if you get into like Romany myths about orcs, the thing that makes orcs so terrifying is that they're almost ghoul-like in the fact that they will hunt your dead. That's part of why they burn them, is so that they wouldn't be eaten by ghouls or orcs.
Yeah.
If you look at other relative Eastern European mythology from either the Croatians or the Serbs, because they have two completely separate. Yes, absolutely, Arctic Princess Arctic. That's exactly how that goes. They are pigmen, absolutely. But no, if you look at either the Croatian or Syrian mythologies, which at that point in time they were separated by several thousand miles, so their origins are different. the Serbs are almost coming from an Asian tradition in their presentation. And the thing that makes the orcs dangerous there is that the orcs actually can innately use magic, which is something that humans can't do. But in the Croatian myths, the thing that makes the orcs so scary.
Oh, I have no clue about Croatian myth. This is where you're the true genius, Maestro.
Oh, well, the Croatians have an amazing set of twists and turns in their mythology compared to some of the other tribal groups moving around at the time. That's why I like bringing them up, because them and the Romani are really exceptions, because for the most part in their history, they were isolated entirely. Like, they weren't allowed to interact because where they sat. The Croatians were a mountainous folk, almost like the Highlands of the Scottish Highlanders, where the way that the people in the Middle East and the subcontinent dealt with them is they just walled them off and said, fuck it, I'm not putting up with this. You know, so it's an entirely different thing. Skavens. Oh, Skavens are an amazing little race. Yes, Skavens are brave. Skavens kill, because I am the best. Praise me. Oh no, so Skavens are awesome. Because they got brought up, I'll delve into them for a second. Skavens are ratmen. They're not were-rats like that exists in mythology, where they're one of the were-beasts. They're actual fully fledged ratmen, and they absolutely believe that every single one of them intrinsically believes they're smartest, best Skaven ever. And
well, when you say fully ratman, the first thing that popped into my inner eye was the picture of the sensei in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Actually, yes, like that would be a Skaven. Accepting the fact that it was created by mutagen, but that's a Skaven. Full stop, because it's not a werebeast. It's a full-fledged creature.
Definitely.
You know, so
and that Skaven was the boss.
Oh yeah, no.
I love that rat person.
Oh, Splinter was awesome, man. Like the best rendition I saw of Splinter was in the 3D animated Ninja Turtles that they did. I think it was 2007. Unfortunately, the dude got the voice actor died, so the whole IP died. But still, like it was a fantastic telling of Splinter in that aspect. One second, I'll be right back. I got something going on in real life. Give me just 2 seconds.
Okay, I'll just continue with one of the articles, or if there's any interesting stuff here in the comment section. Let's see. Prince Hayden did mention something interesting. Let's see here. Where was it? There it is. Another couple Japanese stories that he knows that have pig-like orcs. One is called Tsuki ga Michibiku Isekai Doshu. Definitely a mouthful, that one. Let's see here.
There's a problem is you talk at the same volume as your speakers are
That's definitely something I should check out and read.
You try to match it every time. On the volume down, keep it up.
And then people do seem to be RPing a lot in the chat section. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, as far as Princess Arctic's question, are they similar? No, actually, one of the major differences between a wereboar and an actual orc is the fact that, again, in all the were creatures, those are almost exclusively affecting humans. So it is a human that's been bitten by something, typically a feral creature, if you go back to what happens in mythology, and that makes them exhibit animal-like traits. So if you are a were creature, you could you'd be forcibly manifested into a change at the full moon, this color red, depending on the mythology, or you could do it at will, again, depending on the source of mythology. But that's a normal human wanting to manifest a amalgamation. The difference with an orc as a pigman is that they are permanently in that position. So they are always this way, which means that they have certain characteristics. Like if you go into the actual pig versions of orcs, which is pretty fascinating, they're almost exclusively immune to cold. Okay? Incredibly susceptible to fire. That's how you killed them, actually, in Persian mythology, is if you ran into orcs, you would kill them with fire because nothing else would harm them. Because
kill it with fire.
Purge it with fire. But the reason behind that is what makes orcs scary versus goblins is that orcs can forge. In every version of history, orcs can work a forge. Therefore, they can use metallurgy and blacksmith. So therefore, they can create human tools, which goblins cannot throughout history. Hobgoblins can, but hobgoblins and night goblins are a higher version of goblin. Orcs can do this intrinsically, and that isn't getting into the difference between like a high orc or a gray orc, again, depending on mythology, or their relative depiction in fiction. Or if you're talking about like bestial or feral orcs, again, that's more into like the Eastern mythology there. But in that regard, like they're completely feral, they're completely wild, and they're almost depicted as almost like how the cannibals were described in the rainforest.
Yes, Princess Arctic Fox, you've seen myths of orcs actually being a kind of demon. That is also a different aspect of the lore and mythology of orcs. In some places, they are regarded as demons.
In mythology, every single monster is a demon. Okay?
Exactly.
So in that regards, from a mythological point of view, they are automatically evil and demonic. So in that aspect, that's fixed. That's part of why Goblin Slayer is so appreciated by me, because the goblins are demonic little fuckers. Sure, everybody treats them as weaklings, but they're evil little weaklings. You know, in that regard, orcs are the same way. Now, when you start looking at it as like a playable character class, typically then they have a racial story. So Warcraft, for example, has a very intrinsic racial story. Elder Scrolls has a very intrinsic racial story. Even like Middle Earth, for example. In Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games, things get a little tweaked. So in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, they are still demonic, but they're also a playable race, especially if you're a half-orc. If you're a half-orc, you're not even half demonic at all. Yeah, and that extends to other role-playing games. Warhammer, for example, Palladium role-playing games, if you ever played that. You know, all of those switch. All of those change. And it's entirely dependent on whether or not you're talking about something that a human will be controlling, or if it's something to scare you into reforming your behavior. So if you look at it from a mythological point of view, all of those are parables to try to get you to change your behavior or something to aspire to, right? So in Iliad and the Odyssey, okay, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you're presented with sirens. Sirens, for the most part in mythology, are evil, evil, evil creatures. Now, everyone's grown up seeing My Little Mermaid. Does anyone think of those when they see a siren? Because they're genetically the same thing.
No. When I think of sirens, they have a beautiful song, and in some mythologies, they kind of shapeshift their face between butt ugly and gorgeous. But whenever I think of a siren, I think of the angelic song that pulls you to a hellish wet grave.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying, though, is the fact that a siren is a merfolk. Period. Mm-hmm. That's why I brought up My Little Mermaid. No one thinks Ariel is an evil siren that's going to court people into their death. You know, like that's what I'm trying to get at. Because if you look at the mythology that is trying to tell, right, you either turn into one of these creatures because of your horrible nature. So you're a murderer, you're a rapist, you're a thief, something like that, and you turn into something terrible. Like the entire mythology behind succubi and incubi originally started off as what you turn into if you were a rapist, male or female. That's what they were originally, and they were disgusting, horrible creatures. They weren't these beautiful lust monsters you see all over the fan fiction drawing. Like that's not what they were at all. Like they're not even when you get into like Ubisoft games and like their Heroes of Might and Magic. Which
since we are touching on mermaids again, let me just chill out the link to the first episode of Lore and Games versus General Mythology, since we did touch a lot on mermaids in that episode.
Princess Arctic Fox, you are incorrect. From a mythological point of view, sirens are merfolk. There is no difference. None. Merfolks didn't become the saviors of sailors until about the 1400s. Like, that's where the My Little Mermaid myth comes from, and was first put pen to paper was in the 1500s, was when they wrote down the mythology. But before that, no, they didn't save sailors at all. They were exactly the same creatures. What's strange is that, like, an Eastern siren, for example, is almost a seraphim. Like, they're almost harpy-ish in that regard. Like they're presented with a bird-like feet and wings on their back, and they sing in a song and play a harp. They still kill you, but you know their presentation is completely different. And in Western mythology, they're merfolk, full stop. Like, but yeah, there's another modern difference. There are religions that divide the two. Absolutely, there's religions that divide everything. Most of these mythological,
not just religions, but also different area of mythologies. Like you have Irish mythology, you have Chinese mythology, you have African mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Every single different mythology divides everything.
Who's Silky? I don't even know who that is, so I have no idea.
Oh, a Silky. Oh, I remember that being mentioned in some lore. Isn't the Silky the creature in Irish mythology, or am I totally off the mark right now?
I have no idea.
Double check that while you ramble on.
Yeah, no, it's just like that's one of the things that's interesting for me is like it when you look at again like bringing up religion specifically, there isn't a mythological creature that you know of that you've played in a game that was not a demon in one religion or another. So, for example, everyone is familiar with golems, yes? Right?
Hmm.
You know those little things that move around that are basically like autonomous creatures, but brought about by
now I'm going to touch on the Selkies. Selkies are kind of like mer people. Also spelled Silkies, Silkies, Selkies, or Selkie folk, meaning seal people. They are mythological beings capable of therianthropy, changing from seal to human form by shedding their skin. In some Irish mythologies, though, you can actually steal the seal skin from a Selkie, forcing her to be your wife. Because they can't escape back into the ocean without their seal skin.
Great, so you conquer your own woman. That's fantastic. But yeah, no, I mean, technically that would be a merfolk. I mean, it's not a fish, it's a mammal, but that's a very unique form of mythology. Like, for example, red caps only show up in Gaelic mythology. They don't exist anywhere else. The equivalent outside of Gaelic mythology is night goblins that show up in Norse mythology. They're effectively the same creature. Yeah. So I didn't even know about Selkies before this. Like, that's pretty awesome. I've never heard of them. But
Doc's throwing you a challenge.
Prove you wrong, Doc. I'd rather not. Thanks. But no, getting back into golems, like all of golem mythology actually comes from Judaism. Most people don't know that. Like, that's specifically where it comes from. It comes from the ancient oral tradition pre-Torah. Because at that point, like, the temple wasn't broken, so the Torah didn't exist.
I will actually prove Doc wrong. Because the Mami Wata and the mermaids in African mythology, there are actually mermaids in African mythology. They're referred to as the Mami Wata.
Well, I'm not even talking about that. People don't, for some reason, count Egypt as part of Africa. And sirens are an Egyptian mythological creature that were adopted by the Greeks.
Yeah, still though, in Africa, the mermaid often goes by names such as Mami Wata, translated to Mother Water in West Africa, to Mamba Muntu in Swahili. Nonetheless, they all transcend mankind's metaphysical perceptions of reality. The history of how the mermaid developed in these cultures stemmed from a broader being in the belief of these mystical creatures. Most accounts of how Mami Wata or Mamba Muntu came to be the main symbol of aquatic deities originated from a belief in water spirits, actually. So yes, African mythology does definitely have mermaids.
Okay. I've been laboring at the point I've been trying to get at for a second.
Yes, feel free.
Bringing up golems in Judaism. The point is that there's not a single creature that you can draw to except for maybe Frankenstein's monster, that isn't based in religion. And even then, I can argue quite stringently that Mary Shelley was writing from a Christian perspective on the evilness of surpassing God and reckless science. So that's, but all of these are coached in one religion or another. And 90% of the time, these are the demons that the evil God will use against you. So everybody knows Cerberus, right?
Oh,
Spot.
yes, the dog, the three-headed dog that guards hell.
No, it guards Hades.
Right?
Hades is not hell. Hades is just the land of the dead. There was a difference.
Yes, the underworld.
Yes, the underworld specifically. Well, Cerberus actually translated, it means spot. Amusingly enough, yeah. So
Spot, such a nice dog, Spot.
Exactly. Now, in that particular story, there are many ways that you run into multi-headed dogs. Almost every single one of them breathes fire, aka Cerberus, and leaves, smells of, brimstone, which is sulfur, and these aspects that come from the land of the dead. Now that immediately under Judaic and Christian mythology got turned into a demonic force. It wasn't beforehand. It's one of the few mythological creatures I can point to that isn't evil outright. Most are, which is why Spot is actually such a unique creature in and of itself. So getting back on orc myth, there is hardly a single thing I can reference that isn't a religious take on something. These are all dead religions, so therefore they're pretty much all myths. However, you want to pick a fight with anyone, start bringing up the ridiculousness of Christian or Judaic or Islamic mythology. Anybody want to argue about Djinn, for example? Those are pre-Islam and they still exist. Why? It tells a greater story. That's why it's allowed to exist.
I actually have a funny one about jinns. Another thing that used to be a myth down in Sahara or other places near the Middle East that had deserts was that if you were sleeping in the desert, it was beneficial to sleep in such a way that your feet touched another person's feet, so that the jinn wouldn't come and start eating you from your feet, because they apparently never started with your head. They had to start with your toes. That's kind of funny.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. It makes you suffer more. It's more horrific. It's more terrible. You're alive for longer.
Yeah, they always ate you from your feet up. So if they couldn't find your feet, they wouldn't eat you.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense. It's just, when you look at these types of things, when you look at specifically monster myths, that aren't some cryptozoology bullshit. So you throw out fucking Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, all that crap. Chupacabra. The Chupacabra is still a fucking, downgraded version of Chicacatl, which is an Aztec death god. I mean,
Chupacabra is this little thing that runs really fast and drinks goat blood. It's kind of cute.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's part of the thing. There isn't very many creatures that are kind, and that's one of the things that is kind of frustrating about modern fantasy fiction specifically. When you get into modern fantasy games and modern fantasy stories, most times you're dealing with very, very lovely, nice monsters that are just not human. The best thing I can think of is anthropomorphic animal creature things where you have girls with cat ears and boys with wolf ears, and they're the trait of the animal, and they're nothing else. Yeah, unicorns are nice. Specifically, unicorns are also Gaelic in their mythology, and most people don't know about the bicorn myth as well, because unicorns and bicorns come from the exact same story, and they're reciprocal creatures. Like, if you can ride a unicorn, you'll be hunted by bicorns. If you ride a bicorn, you'll be hunted by unicorns.
Yeah, it's because the bicorn is the evil opposite.
Exactly, and you can't be a pure maiden. You have had to have had sex repeatedly, or else you can't even get on one. Because you'll have no power. For example, like, it'll be completely immobile because you're too pure.
That actually reminds me of the anime Overlord.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I remember that episode. That was so funny.
Yes, it was.
Yes, because that demon chick had been an NPC, so she had never had sex. So she was, in all technicality, a pure maiden, and she couldn't ride her beloved bicorn. It was so hilarious.
That's not the best part. The best part is she's a pure maiden succubus.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the best part out of that. And that's the thing about it, though. Like, one of the most known myths that I know of is one of Meacham's heroes, Micha, M-I-C-H-A. I'll spell it out in chat because I'm having a hard time pronouncing it because it's ancient Gaelic. Micah. Yeah, it's Micah. Micah, for example, is a god of medicine, healing, because everything in Gaelic, if you notice the Trinity knot, is a 3-point thing. So every god has 3 aspects. So Micah is medicine, healing, and life. No, medicine, healing, and longevity, not life. It's subtle difference, but longevity. In that particular story, Gaetheric, Micah's chosen avatar-ish guy, goes out and he meets a chick, and she's an incredibly powerful chick, and in Gaelic mythology that's a thing. Not only is that a thing, but being demonic is not a bad thing either. Micah, yeah. And the chick that he's with, actually, he has an emotional problem, because for her to power up and to power her steed up, she goes and fucks a whole bunch of dudes because she's riding a bicorn. And a big part of the story is how is he going to handle the fact that chick he likes is banging every swinging dick in town. Like that's a large part of the story, because like the ending part where they kill the guy is kind of lame. I mean, they use Kandrik or Kandrik, the Gaelic polearm, the Gaelic spear, and they just stab the dude like right in the chest, and he fucking dies instantly, and it's like fantastic. Where the real drama is between him and the girl that's fucking everything under the sun, so her horse becomes stronger. Like, yeah. And again, like, that's one of the interesting things about Gaelic mythology, is the fact that the goddess of love, life, and lust is a thing. Like, that's one goddess. Love, life, and lust. Like, all of those things are interposed into one goddess. The highest god in Gaelic mythology is life, death, and continuation, or never-endingness. Infinity, basically. And as you look at these various myths, like, there's very few times where you run into a mythological creature that will help you. Most of the time, they'll try to eat you. Specifically, orcs. Like, almost every myth I know about orcs, they've shown up and they've eaten people. Like, one of the most famous orc myths comes from, again, from Neo-Assyria, but this is actually straight up in Neo-Assyria, which is geographically, it's basically Iraq. It's around that area. But anyway, in Neo-Assyria, this whole city-state's starving. And by the time the emperor shows up to bring food, he runs into an entire army of orcs that eats all his soldiers, because they turned into orcs because they became cannibals. And they went on a giant rampage that destroyed the Neo-Assyrian Empire. That's actually the mythology of why they died off. Like, that's the story that left behind, is the fact that the emperor was a conceited asshole that didn't send food to his people, so they starved, turned into orcs, ate all his army, and then ate him. I mean, that's one of the things that I really like, is the fact that orcs specifically are very akin to undead in how they're presented, because they're almost presented with a ravenous hunger, which if you've ever been on a pig farm, you know that pigs are exactly that way. Well, Doc, if you sit around for 5 months out of the year and you can't leave your house and all you have is mead and bandied stories, yeah, like a lot of the Gaelic myths are that way, because you just can't go anywhere. Like, you're trapped inside all the time. You have almost 6 months out of the year you cannot go outside, or else you'll fucking die. I would not particularly want to live in Ireland, which is the warmest Gaelic country, in wintertime with, you know, Bronze Age tools. Fuck that. Jesus God. But yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, you know,
what about the gods related to orc lore?
Okay, well, that's a whole other fun story.
Oh, yes, it is.
So from Babylonian mythology, Balal, or Baal, as he's commonly pronounced now, was their great deity. He's the one that they had to sacrifice all their kids to. He was presented as an orc. He's described in Jewish myth as having a pig snout and massive tusks behind his demonic burning eyes. That's the actual quote.
I love the tusks.
Yep. Well, that's what's that, more than the nose, is what signifies you're not human. Is those big, massive tusks? Because we don't have lower canines. Like, that's the thing. Human canines are a joke compared to every fucking creature on the planet.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Moles have larger canines than we do, and those things are a fucking inch long. It's weird. But no, I mean, like, you know, so that's one of the ways that you could tell that they were decidedly not human. You know, because again, like, in that particular story from Babylon, specifically the Babylonian myths, they're not hairy orcs at all. They're almost your greenskin orcs, except for the fact that they're completely broken red, looking like magma or blood is constantly leaking out of their body everywhere. But they won't die, and they smell of sulfur. You know, I fucking hate talking about brimstone. It's sulfur, for fuck's sake. But you know, they reek of brimstone, and you know, they're constantly bleeding or leaking lava out of their skin, but they're completely hairless. The major difference is the fact that, you know, that Balal is their deity, and Balal is, you know, a fucking massive orc. He's almost Malakath from the Elder Scrolls Online, just a little nastier. You know, I mean, you know,
don't forget the Tyrol Alpine folklore, where the orc is a demon. It says, I see a little small tidbit on a wiki here. As a dwarf, the orc was well-behaved kobold house spirit in wine cellars. He may be connected to the figure Orcys in the medieval poem Virginal about Dietrich von Bern's battle with a vaguely similar being. So apparently the Tyrol Alpine folklore also has orcs, which is a really, really unknown folklore, by the way.
I don't know what that is, so this is unknown to me.
Well, it came to the Alps. Let's see here. The folklore traditions in the Alps of Europe dates back to Christian times, with surviving elements amalgamated from Germanic, Gaulish, which is Gallo-Roman, and Slavic, which is Carantanian, and Rhatinian culture.
Okay.
It's a rather unknown folklore.
Yeah, no. That's a very regionally specific folklore.
Yes.
Yes, actually, Gammon from The Legend of Zelda is an orc. He's the only orc in the entire story, but yes,
and
he's an orc.
Extremely pig-like.
Yeah, well, that's the head bad guy is Gammon, and yeah, no, he's full pig, like full pig. That's one of the weird. The first presentation of Bowser was also an orc. He got changed into a turtle lizard thing upon the Famicom release. They changed it in beta because they couldn't make him look hairy enough in 8-bit technology. It just wasn't working. again, in video games, 8-bit technology is where a lot of the finer details dropped off of these monsters, and they became very, very humanistic. Because you can't draw hair in 8-bit. It doesn't look right. So you just make them green skinned to be not human. You know, and I don't mind that. I don't mind the playable orc at all. As a matter of fact, that's my favorite race to play. That's why I love talking about them. Like my character in Elder Scrolls Online is an Orcimer, and that's one of the things I love about the game is that I can role play an Orcimer supremacist, and they are fine with it.
Do tell me more about that. Don't you have a few funny stories about that?
Oh yeah, no. So there's two guilds in Elder Scrolls Online PC North American server that one of them has been axed because they broke terms of service, because you're not allowed to discuss anything about Earth at all, period. So you can't bring up political anything, religious anything Earth related, but they cover every single ideology and lore from other gods and shit. So like your highly promiscuous, almost hippie chicks are basically priestesses of Mara, because they, in the lore, the priestesses of Mara, regain magical power by loving people, literally. But in that, one of the things that I love is because I can't talk about human ideology, you can't call me a Nazi, period. And there are these two guilds, or there was. One was called Chimera Syndicate. The other one was called Broken Unicorn. Both of them are extremely left-wing LGBT-friendly guilds. And they would repeatedly flip out on me specifically because I'm playing a female character, because I'm obviously a dude. Like, this voice won't cut it as feminine. So first step in role-playing is step away from myself. Second is I'm an Orcimer supremacist. So the big thing about the orcs is like they're perfect. They're slavers. They have no problem with that. If they enslave you via war, it doesn't matter who you are. They brutalize and dehumanize their slaves at every single moment because they fell in war. So therefore, they're not worthy of respect. So I can talk about things like personally marking and piercing my slaves with my tusks, and that's fine because it's a 21 and up game. So you might find it tasteless in chat, but it's just that. It's tasteless if that's how you wish to view it. And one of the things that I took a distinct love to before I started streaming Warframe and ESO took a back burner was whenever I would see these two guilds start bringing up Earth shit, which they would do constantly. That's part of why Broken Unicorn was completely disbanded, and almost every single member of that guild lost their account because they wouldn't stop. And Chimera Syndicate's holding on by a thread for the exact same reasons. I would start going off in my character's RP, where it's like, it doesn't matter what you are. If you're a Mur, you're inferior because you're not an Orcimer. If you're human, then you're purely breeding stock or food, because that's, again, part of their mythology within game. That's part of the lore within game. And I have a great time with it. I would not stop with that. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I've gotten people to absolutely flip their shit. And I've been apologized publicly by ZeniMax Game Masters for how these fucking nut jobs bring real life into fantasy games. Because who the hell wants to deal with real life when you're in some fantasy experience, especially a multiplayer one? MMO.
It's an escape from real life.
Exactly.
It's a vacation.
Mm-hmm. It should be, yeah. It should be a minor vacation from reality for a brief minute or two while you're out and about. That's the thing that I love about it. I mean, I'm not a fucking human supremacist in any way, shape, or form. I don't particularly like that ideology. Is it fun to step into it for a character? Hell yeah. What alignment would I give the character I'm role-playing? Probably chaotic or neutral evil. I mean, I'm not a nice person. But then again, that's part of why I'm role-playing, and part of why I'm fucking around is because I can't do these things in real life. I can't have a disagreement with you, kill you, or enslave you, and rape your body either way. I can in a video game. I can in a tabletop RPG. And that's part of, again, the escapism of these things. And that's one of the frustrating parts about the niceification of monsters in fiction is that you lose a great deal of what makes them different. I mean, if the only major difference between them and humans is their exterior characteristics, then you aren't really holding those creatures in reverence in any way, shape, or form. You might as well just make them another group of humans, or do the Trekkie thing and just say they're aliens from another planet, even though they're obviously human. They have 2 belly buttons, so they're clearly not human, which is a thing Star Trek did. They actually got pissed off at the censors for not allowing them to show a belly button, so they created an entire alien race of female-only aliens that had double belly buttons. Thank you, fucking fiction. But no, I mean, it's like that there's no reason to have that. There's no reason to have that engagement. Like, what makes kobolds so frightening is the fact that they are ratmen, and they will reproduce in the thousands. That's where they come. Like the entire mythology for kobolds comes out of Gallic mythology, and they are terrifying little fucking bastards. You know, and the equation there is that if you have poor hygiene, if you don't maintain yourself, if you allow yourself to denigrate, you'll become a kobold, according to Gallic myth. Now, kobolds nowadays are either a dog person or some dragonoid thingy bop, and they have nothing of their disgusting nature that's even allowed for them to have. You know, again, goblins were the lowest of the low in the demonic totem pole, to the point where other demons thought that they were conniving, sniveling, disgusting creatures. And how many stories do we have now where you can play a goblin and goblins are somehow redeemable? In World of Warcraft, for example, goblins are on par with gnomes in their scientific advancements. Huh? Like, what? When did goblins become smart?
Yeah, when?
Yeah. I mean, part of what made ogres so terrifying was the fact that not only were they cannibals and they would eat you, but the fact that they could make magical equipment from birth. So they wouldn't have to learn to be a smith. They know how to do it intrinsically. Like, they're born with that skill. They can make arms and armament from birth that's magically made, period. You know, that's fucking terrifying. They were about the same size as a human. Like, ogres weren't bigger than humans for a long, long time. It really wasn't until about the 18th century that ogres were classified as a giant race, you know, in his historical fiction, and science fiction in general at the time. You know, before that, ogres were a special type of non-human that could pass as human, which, again, in both Eastern and Western mythology, the more human you were in physical appearance, the more dangerous you were. Which is why, again, if you look at Bram Stoker's Dracula, the thing about him that was the most terrifying, besides walking around in daylight, was the fact he was completely normal. He's a completely normal human. Like, all of the evil, horrendous shit that you see him do is behind closed doors. When he's out in public, he looks just fine. You know, you don't get that with a lot of other monsters because they're completely, obviously not human from the beginning. It's either size or a racial demarker. With orcs specifically, how are you going to pass as human when you have a big fucking pig snout on your face and massive fucking tusks, hairy or not? You know, especially when you get into some of the weirder, like, dragon races too, like dragon newts, for example. Dragon newts have been around forever. They come out of the Cretan area, Crete, island of Minos, Minotaur birth, that kind of thing. The thing about dragon newts were the fact that they were either descendant from dragons or were demons that could live in the current world. And either way, their primary dinner was human. Like, they could farm, they could do animal husbandry and raise their own livestock, but eating human is actually their favorite food. So they would hunt humans, aka the predator style. You know, how this correlates with the real world is in ancient Egypt, there was an avian predator, which was basically a predatory version of an albatross. And the way that
an albatross.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious.
That's funny, though.
No. There's a reason why it doesn't exist nowadays. It's because the Egyptian Empire would pay you a gold per bird, and they were hunted to extinction. I mean, you're talking about a bird with a 7-foot wingspan that's predatory with a massive beak. And what it would do is it would fly down and kill women and children because they could. Men were a little too big, but young boys could get carried away. You're talking about something that could fly off with an 80-pound load weight, minimum.
Well, albatrosses are big, so it doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, but no, they were hunted to extinction because they were a threat. The same thing happened with dire wolves. That's why wolves are now the primary land animal in the canine family, and coyotes are moving to take up the old wolf slot because we hunted them to extinction. Cave bears don't exist anymore. You know, but in the switchover between having a fence to protect yourself from nature and having a fence so that way there was still nature around, we've switched the role of the scary animal monster. That's why they're now something that should be protected and cherished, as opposed to something that we should hunt and kill. Like, prior to 300 years ago, you could not tell a story about orcs or demons, or hell, like if you told a story about demons specifically 300 plus years ago, you'd probably be killed. You know, unless it was a very black and white where the demons are always evil. You know, like Milton from Paradise Lost nearly got killed because he went into the entire angelic history myth of, you know, angels and the fall of angels. And he was nearly killed by the church for heresy because he presented Lucifer in a positive light for the first quarter of the book. No shit.
That is true.
So, like, what the switch over from protecting yourself from nature to protecting nature from yourself, that's where monsters have changed from being something to fear and kill on sight, and as we were joking earlier, purge with fire, to something that needs to be interacted with and respected for its right to exist. You know, skin changers, for example, if anybody's familiar with North American, Native American mythology, are one of the most terrifying things I've ever read about. And
oh yeah, you mean the shapeshifters who could, as opposite to werewolf, where the people could just don some fur and then change into that animal?
Yeah, well, depending on the myth, like the reason for scalp taking was because skin changers could change into the person with their scalp.
That's
down to the very feature. So part of the reason why you would take your enemy's scalps was in case there was a skin changer around, you didn't want your enemy to come back and kill you after you've already killed them. It was also a way that you could send them off to some form of sanctified burial as well.
Yes.
I mean, skin changers are fucking disgusting, terrible creatures. And the best representation I've seen of them in fiction is Jim Butcher's modern wizardry series, The Dresden Files. And he presents a skin changer as an actual skin changer, and it's fucking horrifying. Every scene with this creature is absolutely disgusting, terrible, and almost got the author in trouble with his printing company because of how graphic and vivid he was in the depiction of the skin changer and what they could do and what they do. Because I mean, you're talking about something that cannot die naturally. That's what made skin changers so horrible, is that, you know, well, one of the myths of how a skin changer is killed is a warrior from the Sioux tribe takes one and jumps into an exploding volcano with it, and that kills it. Because the volcano blew up and the damn thing died. They think it might have gotten away and hit itself. They don't know. They're thousands upon thousands of years old. You know, and it's one of the fun things, because like the closest that I've found to actual orcs from mythology versus actual orcs from that you can play is in Palladium games. If you're familiar with those at all, you're familiar with Palladium role-playing? Okay. Well, they're the makers of Rifts. That's their most popular.
Oh, yeah, I know about that.
Okay. Well, in that, the orcs are total pigmen. They're absolute orcs. And they're an RCC, a racial character class, so you can play them. They're a very, very tiny RCC. They're only a 10-level RCC, which is small for a Palladium race. But the major thing about them that makes them so dangerous as a fantasy race is that one of their innate born skills is they can use all human technology by picking it up.
Cool.
and they can eat anything. Quite literally, they can eat.
That's kind of spooky again.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing about them, because in the Palladium game, they're a zombie race. They're necromancers, because because they kill and eat so many things. The best way that they can raise an army is just to raise the corpses of what they've eaten, because otherwise they just can't support a long attrition war. So they became necromancers and warlocky, and very, very similar to like pre-Azeroth invasion orcs, just pigmen versions.
Mm.
You know, when the orcs were still controlled by Gul'zen or Gelzer or whatever you pronounce his name, the orc warlock.
Which lore are we in now?
We're in World of Warcraft, prior to the Azerothian invasion that made Warcraft orcs versus human. Warlocky, yes.
Oh yeah, that one, yeah.
Yeah, well, in that one, like, there is no real difference between the orcs that Gul'zen controls and the orcs that you see in the Palladium universe. The major difference is that they use demonic fel essence instead of necromantic essence. But they can eat fucking anything now that they're under the fel. That's part of why they don't really need to eat anything, because they eat the dead. You know, which is a very orc thing to do from their history. Like, orcs don't have any sort of burial rites, and the big thing that you'd have to do on a battlefield is you'd have to clean it up to keep the battlefield clean of orcs and ghouls. Because according to mythology, if you left a battlefield full of bodies, you get invaded by orcs and ghouls, or orcs or ghouls, because they're mutually exclusive. Like, ghouls are a type of undead that, you know, will eat anything, and orcs are a living creature that'll eat anything, and they kind of will kill each other off. But, you know, still though, like, that's one of the fascinating things about them, is the fact that they're typically presented where they can just completely live off the land. Because if there's dead carrion of anything, orcs can eat it. They're pigs. They don't have any digestive problems from that. You know, and if worst case scenario, if they have to, they can eat grass and tree bark because they're pigs. They have no issues with that. I mean, and that's part of why, like, orcs from mythology and games don't really farm. They don't really invent anything. They don't really make anything because they don't really have to. They're bestial enough that they can beat any real creature one-on-one in the buff, you know, kind of fight. Or if it's a weapon fight, they can use all the weapons that humans can because they have human hands. You know, excluding a few very specific myths coming from Central Europe that I'm familiar with. Like, and in that one, they have cloven hands. And I have no idea how they can hold shit if you have a giant fucking hoof for a hand. But even then, they're using a type of cestus, punch weapon, around their hooves, or hooved hand things. Yeah, think that terrible Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. I think it's Bloodsport, or is it Kickboxing?
Oh yeah, I remember the Bloodsport movies. There are actually more than one.
Yeah, the one where they wrap his hands in shit and dip it in some type of goo. Yeah. That's a cestus. That's a punching. That's a punching gauntlet, and it's not quite a guitar, which is what you see where it's got the Wolverine fangs on it. But, you know, in that specific myth, like, they have an entire set of weapons that they use that are based around their cloven hooves, their cloven hands rather. But that's the only one that I'm familiar with where they don't have human hands. So they're the same as minotaurs in that aspect. Now, sometimes they have human feet, and sometimes they have minotaur feet. I mean, that depends on the myth, and that depends on the game. Yeah, that depends on the fantasy medium in general. But, you know, that's kind of nitpicky a little bit as to whether or not they have feet or hooves. But yeah. It was like an hour and a half, like, what I know about orcs off the top of my head.
Oh, it hasn't been fully an hour and a half. It's been an hour and about 14 minutes.
Oh, God. Okay, I could come up with 15 more minutes of Orc Fud. Okay, so one of the things that's really interesting in monster myth and monster lore is the fact that there's a demarcation difference between a lord and a king. And the thing that makes orcs specifically different in mythology is that orcs use neither. Orcs have warlords. So as opposed to having like a goblin lord, which is basically a king level, they have warlords. as their basic tribal leader is a warlord. Just to give you an idea of where they sit on their aggression scale, because specifically, like in Persian mythology, they
also have chiefs. Chiefs.
Chiefs.
Yes, as leaders.
Oh, chiefs. Yeah, well, a war chief or warlords. It depends on the translation. Like warlord's better in English than it is than war chief. But
in Warcraft, they actually have communities with chiefs.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a very gamey version of them where the orcs are completely civilized. I mean, for orcs, they're completely civilized. You know, yeah. Sure, they're not as polished as the humans, but they have towns. You know, they have long-term structures. Because that's one of the things that's weird. Because if you get into mythology, orcs don't build houses. They don't. They don't. At best, they have a teepee basically that they haul around, a massive tent. But that's only in a couple of places, like Gallic myths, for example, say that they live in massive tents. But that's in Gallic mythology, where it's fucking.
I'm sure about them having shacks, which closely resembles houses, but aren't exact houses.
Yeah, well, that I think has more to do with like their level of construction. Yeah. Because orcs got dumber, depending on where you went. Like. From what I know about Eastern mythology, specifically like Middle East and subcontinent Asia, the orcs are incredibly intelligent. Now, if you get up into like the Gallic myths or the Frankish myths or the Nordic myths, they're pretty dumb, but they're fucking.
Yeah. Up in the Nordic myths, like up here in Norway, it's not so much orcs, but we do have trolls, and they're quite dumb.
Well, yes, but in Nordic myths, orcs are a type of troll.
Yes.
So I mean, like that's a huge distinction there because in Nordic myths, orcs can regenerate. They're also immune to
depending on the type of troll. Yes.
Well, but they're also immune to cold as well, which goes back to the same thing of being furred or being just whatever. They're immune to the cold because so they don't need. To have these massively built houses that have central heat, basically. Of
more than fire, we actually had a specific way of killing them with sunlight in our mythology.
Oh, wow. So that they're almost vampiric in the fact that sunlight is their enemy.
Yeah, it turns them to stone.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very giant myth. I did not know that they were full-fledged giant kin, because that's how you defeat most giants, is they turn to stone in one way or another.
Yeah, both giants and trolls are a big part of Nordic mythology, and the most common trait is that they turn to stone by sunlight.
Well, no, I mean, that makes sense. What the... Why did this... sorry, I got distracted by something silly. Nah, I did for some reason my Twitter's reposting tweets that were auto-tweeted. Go away. Anyway, but sorry about that. Totally distracted me and killed our train of thought. But yeah, no, I mean, like that's one of the interesting things, and I wouldn't mind getting into giant myths because giants are fantastic. If we're talking about cyclopses to trolls to ogres, like depending on where you are, depends on the how rich the panoply of giants are. As far as I know, though, as far as orcs go, like the real demarcation between them is a high orc or gray orc, and that's really about it as far as they go. Like orcs don't have a lot of evolutionary paths that I'm familiar with. Like they pretty much only have one. Goblins have about 5 to give you an idea of the difference. Minotaurs have about 7. Orcs are pretty much just your grunt army troop because it was brought up a demonic conversation earlier, and that's one of the things in the Greek form of Apocalypse, the Fall of Olympus, is the Titans use a form of orc army that they bring out of chaos and abyss. They're humanoid creatures covered in fur with.
I do think that we do have some Titans in our old lore as well, actually.
Yeah.
In Greek mythology, you have the Titans as opposites to the gods, and that's actually a trait in Nordic mythology as well.
Close. The Titans are the predecessors of the gods. They're their parents, and the gods kill their parents to establish.
In Nordic mythology, though, that's where Loki came from.
Well, Loki, depending on the version of Nordic mythology I'm familiar
with.
The
version I've heard is that Loki's father meant to kill Loki, and Odin saved him and raised him as his own.
Yeah, that's the most common one I'm familiar with, where Odin saves him as opposed to steals him. Yeah. But in either case, the thing about Loki that makes him useless to the frost giants is the fact he's so small. He's a runt. So they're willing to kill him off because he's a runt.
Yes.
He's human-sized. He's not, 4 to 5 meters tall. So therefore...
But he is supposed to have a different skin color. He is supposed to be blue like the frost giants.
Well, yeah, he's a frost giant. That again, though, like part of what I understand about Nordic mythology is that Odin does something when he raises him that makes him appear divine, and it's not until Ragnarok that the secret of his lineage is brought forth.
Correct.
But, again, the Nordic myths have been butchered a lot in modern fiction, so it's kind of hard to discern like what's the original Skald myth and what's the actual what's modern fantasy versions of those myths. Where in Gaelic mythology, it's not until very recently that Gaelic mythology started getting plundered. So, like, for example, like in Daimachi, they have Micah, but that's one of the only places I've seen him in any modern story. He pretty much doesn't exist except in Gaelic mythology. Same with Hera, the over goddess, the goddess of life, death, and infinity. And that's one of the things that's really fascinating is looking at the difference of the core story and where it's been taken and where those influences come from. And that's part of why I was bringing up like the difference between conserving nature and destroying nature, whereas nature is the enemy, so kill it, or nature is, the what's left of our mother, so save it, and how that affects the myths within.
Yeah.
And I find that to be the most interesting part of the current storyline is because so many of these ancient stories are changing because of the current desire to wall off nature and keep some because we're about to overrun it. I mean, this is really the first time in history where there have been enough humans that humans are now the primary aggressor in our stories. There's not some mythological force. There's not even, humans controlled by demons anymore. It's just humans as humans are the major monster that we're dealing with. Because there isn't something that you're going to find over the next hill that no one's ever seen before. Those are few and far between and very, very rare these days. Like, that's a huge find to find something that we thought was extinct or we didn't know about it. Like, that's part of why, like, rainforest and abyssal shelf conservation is so important and prevalent, is because we're running into new life that we've never run into before ever, and these are the only places we can find them is at the very bottom of the ocean or in the very heart of the few wild places left. And I think that's why the modern monster myths are the cryptozoology stories, because there aren't very many places where you can find those wild things anymore. And because of the overall human stepping away from mysticism and magical thinking, telling modern demonic stories don't really get you anywhere, like, at all. Like, nobody's interested in Constantine, even though I find it an amazingly rich DC comic. It's one of the few DC comics I really, really like. But nobody's really interested in it.
Yeah, Constantine was an interesting guy, but at the same time, you also have the city Constantinople.
See, like that's the thing. Like Constantinople, is referred to almost in myth. Like it's like Constantinople itself has almost become an Antillean layer of myth around it, because nobody wants to think of Constantinople as Istanbul. Nobody views those as the same place, even though they're geographically the same city with some of the same buildings still intact. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. We've gone far afield from orc talk.
Indeed we have. Indeed we have. We should probably return to orcs.
Well, I pretty much talked orcs dry, unless there's something that you want to go into specifically, because I've been talking broadly this entire time. So unless there's something specific you want me to go into, I've pretty much covered the bases.
How about the different things that orcs can do in Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh,
in different editions, how they change.
Okay, well, in first edition Dungeons and Dragons, goblins were throwaway and orcs were your standard bad guys. And in first edition, there really wasn't an alignment system. In second edition, orcs became the priority of chaotic evil in their alignment, and therefore almost every god uses orcs as their manifest creation. In third edition and beyond. Sorry,
before you go to third edition, wasn't it first in the second edition that the orc is presented as a playable character race again in the player's option?
No. In 2.5, there was a half-orc template that was produced, but it started off at level 8. In 3.5, the half-orc race is completely playable at level 1, and orcs are completely unplayable unless your GM allows you to.
But in second edition, the orc is detailed as a playable character race in the complete Book of Humanoids, is it not?
I'd have to check my books, but I don't believe so. Because that's one of the things.
Yeah, the complete Book of Humanoids, 1993.
Okay. I haven't looked through it in a long time, but I think that's the 2.5 edition, where they switched out a lot of things, because that's where they finalized dual classing.
And then they later presented it as a playable character race again in Player's Option Skills and Powers in 95.
Okay, cool. Very cool. I did not actually have the complete player races book, so today I learned.
But you did say third edition. Isn't third edition the first time they introduced the Grey Orc, or was the Grey Orc also introduced earlier? I don't remember.
No, Grey Orcs were Grey Orcs and High Orcs were the progeny of two separate but competing evil gods. In D&D mythology. Now that depends on which campaign world you're in. And those appear in the campaign settings from second edition on. Because that's one of the things, because Baal gets killed between second and third edition, and they bring Cyric up as the new chaotic evil god.
Yeah, because I know the Grey Orc is presented as a player character race for the Forgotten Realm setting in both Races of Faerun and Unapproachable East, both which came in 2003.
But that's the thing, like Grey Orcs and High Orcs are an orc offshoot, where they're a pure form of orc, where they haven't been corrupted by Baal, so therefore they're not the progeny of the chaotic and neutral evil gods. Because that's one of the things, like orcs have pretty much always been used in Dungeons and Dragons as here's your opposing evil army, excluding like the Ravenloft or Spelljammer settings. Like that's one of the things about orcs, is the fact that orcs fully scaled from the monster manual from level 1 up to level 50 without
as Doc says in the chat, the half orc was playable in second and full orc came around in third.
Okay. Yeah, see, because I'm pretty certain that from at least what I played in second ed, there was a half-orc template that you could apply and play with, but you couldn't play a full orc because of that. Like, most of the monster races were cut off.
But then, as we move to the 3.5 edition, this is fun. You have the aquatic orc, the arctic orc, the desert orc, the jungle orc, the orc paragon, and the water orc.
Yeah,
in Unearthed Arcana.
Well, that's because in 3rd edition, elves were presented in every freaking livable setting. So, like, in that particular regard, orcs were based as a counterbalance to elves. So if there's aquatic elves, there's aquatic orcs. If there's Arctic elves, there's Arctic orcs. If there's desert elves, there's desert orcs. Because
how are these different orc types? Like, what makes the orcs separate in their categories?
Largely their racial bonuses and their subtle differences. Like, again, orcs are a type of greenskin in every single type of Dungeons and Dragons. So what makes them different is, like, aquatic orcs, for example, are blue. Arctic orcs are pure white. Their color changes. They have no fur. Instead of being green, they're elemental colored. Oh yeah, no, Doc's right on the target there. Dragon Magazine's freaking amazing.
Yeah. How about their weaknesses?
Oh, well, orcs really don't have a specific racial weakness except for cold iron and silver in mythology. In Dungeons and Dragons, they don't have a weakness because they're humanoids. Like, they're weak enough already. Like, what makes an orc level 50 is that it's a level 20 fighter or peasant hero or whatever, and then it has on, equivalent gear. So it's in master gear on top of having, not the character template. You use the NPC templates from the Dungeon Master, but still, like, that's what makes them scary. So they don't particularly tend to have a lot of weaknesses.
So the basic differences in Dungeons and Dragons is their skin color.
Their skin color and their tusks and their snout. Like, that's one of the big things. Because, like, half orcs, like, one of the characters I played for the longest time was a half orc that was completely human except for their orc snout. So as a thief, it would suck because you have a snout that would sniffle that you can't control because that's a racial negative. You look completely human, but you have a pig nose. And like that's one of the fun things because, like, in the half orc category, you are half orc and half something else, and you have to pick the something else because they're not an actual racial demarker. Like, there aren't clans of half orcs that are half human and half orc. You in the half orc category, you run into dwarf orcs, elf orcs, dryad orcs. They're pretty much any. See, because that's one of the things that makes orcs powerful in Dungeons and Dragons is they can literally breed with anything. Like, I saw a Dungeon magazine that had a half orc, half displacer beast.
Okay, that's hilarious.
Well, displacer beasts are like dragons; they can polymorph at will.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the fun things about them is that displacer beasts are neutral evil. So, with their psychic powers, you can make them do all kinds of fucking disturbing shit because they can turn completely human and fuck with your head because most people aren't psychers.
Yeah.
And so therefore they have no mental resistance. Not even wizards have psychic resistance. So, that's one of the things that makes psyching overpowered in Dungeons and Dragons and why it took until 3.5 for them to get psyching right. Because psychers were just broken as fuck. And that's one of the things that sucked about beholders is that you'd run into a goddamn beholder and it just does mind domination and you're screwed because you have no way of defending against it. It's not a spell. There's no will save. Like, you either have psychic resistance and can resist off that, or you're fucked. Same thing with mind flayers in Dungeons and Dragons. They're native psychers and they've been around since Dungeons and Dragons 1. Yet there weren't playable psychers until Dungeons and Dragons 2.
Yeah.
So I mean, like that's one of the things that makes the freaking Cthulhu kin so goddamn scary. But like orcs are rapacious in Dungeons and Dragons. Like they can mate and breed with anything. Their only real weakness is the fact they are by all standards weak creatures.
Other types of orcs introduced in 3.5 was the orc snow shaman, who appeared in Frostburn, mastering the perils of ice and snow. And the orc battle priest, the orc berserker, and the warhowler arc are introduced in the Monster Manual 4 in 2006.
Well,
Frostblood orcs.
Well, but see, that's the thing. Like orc berserkers, like that's a thing that goes back to mythology. Like that's been around forever. So
yeah, but the Frostblood orcs are kind of interesting, aren't they?
Oh yeah, no, like that's the thing that I really like in that is that the thing about the Frostblood orcs is that they're almost troll-like. Like they actually are born with regeneration. So
good. They're kind of like the frost giants in some aspects.
Like the only way you can kill a Frostblood orc, as far as I know, is to use a magic weapon or silver because it'll just regenerate otherwise, or acid. You know, if you have acid or something that can burn it, yeah. Any form of orc was shunned and or violently confronted. They were unwelcome in most cities. Yeah, no, that's typically how they were handled, Doc. I mean, I did that multiple times as well. That was one of the fun things that I would do with my players as a storyteller is set them up in a position where they're breaking alignment because they're following culture. And this is prior to the 3.5 revision about in-group, out-group alignment. Because that got into how you could play, you know, a good orc and still do terrible things. The description that they give in for that is that hill giants are chaotic evil, but in giant culture they're usually lawful good, because under giant culture they're required to kill and murder everything to make the giant gods happy. So if you're actually following giant tradition and giant requirements to appease their deities, you end up murdering and eating everything around you. And that's part of where relative alignment got introduced, and I love the hell out of it, because if you get into relative alignment, orc clans are lawful good. Same with goblins. They are lawful good within the clan. Drow are as well. They're fucking Drow. Oh shit. Like, you can make Drow paladins that are technically their standard lawful evil, but within their own culture, they are lawful good. Even though to everyone else, they're fucking nasty little bastards. Like, that's one of the things I really liked about that switch.
But back to the second edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
We didn't touch on the Andante, a version of orcs bred by the goddess Eldath.
Because I'm not familiar with it, so I don't know.
There's also, let's see, the Sharakim.
Okay. Is that in the Arabian expansion?
The Sharakim are a race of orcs that were transformed from humans and appeared as a player character race in Races of Destiny 2004 in 3.5 edition.
Okay. So again, this is going back to the mythological base where you're talking about transformed humans into a monstrous form.
Yes.
Like, that's interesting to see how Dungeons and Dragons pulls off that very, very standard mythological story and reintegrates it quite well into them, because that's where a good number of the orc stories come from. Like, one of the most well-known orcs I know in mythology got completely replicated in Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition. And that orc was actually an orc hero, which by Dungeons and Dragons standards, or an orc, nasty enemy according to mythology. But the thing about them that they did in Dungeons and Dragons that made them so unique is the fact that they can wield divine power. Now, that sounds very good from a mythological point of view, but divine power can mean evil gods as well,
Yes.
So that's one of the things about them. Like, whereas like goblins, for example, have shamans that's roughly equivalent to like a witch doctor. Orcs could and do in almost every mythology have a priest caste, which is something about them that's an upgrade over goblins yet again, is the fact that they're able to wield and implement divine magics and control. I need to get a drink. I've been talking for well over 90 minutes. I'll be right back.
I actually took the chance to get a glass of water while you were talking earlier. Although I can't really say that I know much about the Andante, even though they are a version of orcs bred by the goddess Eldath. It was from the Forgotten Realms campaign setting.
Second edition Forgotten Realms is a little beyond me. I've played most of the time in just standard Greyhelm Dungeons and Dragons because I didn't.
Most of the Dungeons and Dragons I know is like 3 and 3.5 edition now.
Well, I mean, when 2 and 2.5 were being produced, like out here in the heartland of America, like back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a movie done by Tom Hanks called Mazes and Monsters, in which everyone goes off and takes LSD and kills themselves in the movie. And everyone out here took that to be gospel because, Tom Hanks was in it. So therefore, that's clearly what happened. So, I mean, it was like, that's one of the jokes that I have on one of the servers I'm in, where I talk about the fact that, I was openly a D&D player all, from high school on. And like, everybody in the server was openly, what the fuck? I'm like, dude, I went to high school in the early 90s. What the fuck? I graduated in 99. What's wrong with you? But yeah, no, I mean, like, as far as Dungeons and Dragons go, like, if you look at the various generations of it, like, first edition Dungeons and Dragons, orcs are pure monsters. Second edition Dungeons and Dragons, they're slightly humanized. Third edition, they're fully humanized. Fourth edition, it's kind of a joke. Like, fourth edition, they're not listed in the monster manual at all. They're listed in the player's manual. There is a monster manual version of them, just like there is of human, but meh.
Yeah,
like,
as the Battle Priest, Berserker, and Warhowler were in the monster manual.
Yeah, because those are non-player classes. The Berserker is not the same thing as a Barbarian, which is the equivalent of a player class Berserker.
It does also appear in the monster manual in 4th and 5th edition.
Jesus, there's a 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes, there's a 5th edition from 2014, still ongoing, apparently.
I am old. I did not know about that. I need to go get, like, leg warmers and a fucking heater and sit back and tell stories about the good old days. Fuck.
Yeah, and the 5th edition, they are even given further detail and are available as a player character race in the supplement Volo's Guide to Monsters.
Of course. See, because things started getting weird in, like, 4th edition when you could start playing things like Minotaurs and Chimera as playable races.
Yeah, which edition was it where you could suddenly start being a ninja?
Oh, that's actually 2nd edition. That's where they released the Arabian and Oriental expansions.
I thought that was 3rd edition.
Yeah, no, that's 2nd edition where they first come out. The big problem with the ninja skills is they did not truly define the difference between a hard and a soft style martial art. So it didn't really make a lot of sense. In 3rd edition, they spent a good part of the martial arts section that you build for your ninja explaining the difference. There's a good 3 paragraphs of that weren't in 2nd edition, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you could start doing that in 2nd edition. Like, I did a really fun Arabian Nights campaign in 2nd edition where I retold 1001 Arabian Nights. Yeah, Oriental.
You know what would be kind of hilarious? A ninja orc.
Absolutely. No. In Oriental Adventures. In Oriental Adventures, they bring in the Night Goblin, which is a form of ninja goblin, which exists in Nordic mythology, and they made that fully substantiated monster. And there is an entire set of pirate orcs that know martial arts. So, they throw ninja stars and use blow darts, and they're pirates and shit. Like,
and
that's
that is absolutely fun times.
Oh yeah, no, I had a lot of stupid giggles with people getting into long, detailed parlay conversations because in that
I freaking love parlay.
Well, that's the thing. Like in Oriental interaction, their pirates for the most part were only along 3 coastlines. And therefore, their pirates engaged in a lot of parlay with the various leaders of these empires, be it the Qin dynasty in China, which gave them their name, or the little island that they claimed, Siam, or Korea. Like they weren't like Western pirates where you could just take off on the sea because they didn't have a sextant. nor a compass. So they were restricted to the coastline. So this is reflected in Dungeons and Dragons as well. So there's an entire parlay system with bandits and pirates that's unique to Oriental Adventures 2nd edition that gets substantiated in the campaign settings in 3.0.
Mm.
Well, no, it's an amusing little side story that I later found out that was based off of reality. I thought that was a role-playing game thing that they set up, and no, it's based off of what happened in history.
Yeah.
So, the funny thing about
what did you mean about ninja orcs being part of Nordic mythology?
night goblins.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I thought you were mainly thinking about the ninja orcs as part of the
No.
and that made no sense to me.
No. Night goblins were brought into Oriental Adventures because they were goblin assassins from Nordic mythology, and they were best used in Dungeons and Dragons as an Oriental style ninja. And they also brought in martial artist orcs. So that's where I lost you a little bit. Was those two things were brought into Oriental Adventures specifically. And the Night Goblin race was specifically brought in, and the Night Goblin's only major difference from a Red Cap is instead of being able to eat things, it could travel through shadow. Like, that's the difference. Red Caps can eat anything that they can fit their mouth around, whereas Night Goblins can use shadow movement, basically.
Yeah, makes more sense.
So it makes more sense in the Oriental campaign to have them be ninjas where they can slip in and out of shadow, which is already pretty ninja-esque to begin with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where that came up. And I'm sorry that tripped you up a little bit, but that's there are no ninja orcs. There are no ninja orcs or martial, like sword saint kind of layers of any monster that I know of, except for ogres. Specifically, ogres can teach humans how to use swords or fight with their hands and feet better than humans can. But that's a specific type of ogre that's restricted to Frank mythology and Japanese mythology. Because for some reason, the French romanticized a lot of shit. Thank you, French. But yeah, no, in Frank mythology, the ogres could teach you, like, there's a mythological story that dates back to pre-Charlemagne, because Charlemagne's equipment was supposedly made by the last ogre in France. He made all of his armor and shit because that's who Charlemagne was, the one who he decided would be his king before he died. So that's why he made all of his gear. That's the most modern telling, because I mean Charlemagne died in around like 1100, 1200 AD. So I mean, like, that's, you know, that's early enough. That's still kind of in myth levels. It's still legend-ish. You know, it's not full mythology level. You're not looking back to like the oral tradition and going, yeah, okay, that's totally off the charts. What do you mean that Kabbalic Jews can bring clay golems to life by writing life in their head? What? You know, first golem myth ever comes from Kabbalic Judaism. You know, hell, the first Christian, like some of the first Christian myths actually substantiated succubi from being a type of rapist to a succubi and incubi being a type of demon. Like, succubi and incubi moved around Christian mythology and Christian history, and that's what would tempt good quality Christians into sinning. And, you know, why they would cheat on their wives or husbands was because they slept with an incubus instead of, you know, Zeus appearing as a goose and impregnating some chick as a goose. Like, okay, Greeks.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, what? Go ahead.
We have about a little more than 10 minutes left. Why don't we turn our attention over to Tolkien's Orcish lore?
Which one? Tolkien?
Tolkien.
Oh, Tolkien's orcs. Oh, that's a whole fun side story. So, Tolkien's
We're just going to squeeze that in there in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, Tolkien's orcs are Tolkien uses orc and goblin interchangeably in the same goddamn sentence, which is fucking confusing as shit. But
yeah, I'm going to start with, before Orome first found the elves at Crevien and Melkor enslaved some of them and cruelly tortured them, turning them into orcs.
Yeah, but that's the very first telling of orcs when there were still tons of the Balrogs running around.
Yeah, and you also have Melkor. And no, I just mentioned Melkor, but there was another one too. Isn't Melkor also referred to as Morgoth? Or were they actually two separate beings?
I'm typing 1 second. That depends, because in the Silmarillion, it reads like a history book. And the big thing that Tolkien was setting up was he was trying to write the history of it. And part of one of the things, if you've ever read Tolkien's Unfinished Tales, he starts writing a trilogy story about the first fall that led the Dark Lord to creating the Rings of Power and his fall from grace. Because it was the first Dark Lord that came about that was wielding Balrogs all over Middle Earth. Because that's the big thing. Like, orcs were something he was trying to do to taint the elves. Balrogs were his main fighting force. So that big thing that killed Gandalf, imagine thousands of them running around. Like
because they do say that Melkor enslaved elves, turning them into orcs by cruelly torturing them. But they also say that they were first created by the Dark Lord Morgoth. And later on, Melkor and Morgoth are kind of mentioned as the same being, which is kind of confusing.
See, like that's part of the difference, because in the Silmarillion, Malkar and Morel are competing with each other in the history book that Tolkien wrote. In Unfinished Tales, they're the same. They're the name for the same person. But
no, I didn't say Morel. I said Morgoth.
Sorry, Morgoth. Sorry. But they're the same person. The name depends on whether or not it's an elvish name or if it's a Numenorian name, a human name.
Which makes more sense.
Because in that story, that the humans live as long as the elves do, because Numenor is still there. What breaks Numenor is the arrogance of the human kings of Numenor, and they fall from grace because they think that they can handle the Balrogs by themselves, and it destroys their whole fucking empire and sinks Numenor into the ground. And that's another Antillean myth right there, because it's the fall of Atlantis again, but in Middle Earth. But the main presentation of orc armies was done under Sauron. Actually, the Dark Lord Sauron, who comes after Morgul, is the one who makes orc armies, because he takes what Morgul did as a way to spite and basically, ruin the elves, and turns them into an army, and they can breed. And that's the thing that happens. The difference is when the first Dark Lord corrupts the elves, they turn into orcs and goblins, but they can't reproduce. But when Sauron does it, because he himself was an elf before he falls, he manages to make it so that way they're a completely separate reproducing race.
Yes, as seen in the movies when you pull these creatures out of their sacks, right?
Well, no, those are the Uruk-hai. Those are the upgraded human mixture, where they mix human blood with goblin blood and make goblins that can move around in the daytime. Yeah. Those are Uruk-hai, and they're bigger and stronger and faster and tougher than the orcs are. The big difference, though, between the first ages orcs and the second ages orcs is in the first ages orcs, you can corrupt them into a goblin by torturing them for thousands of years, but they're still elvish. They're still divine in their nature. It's not until Sauron steps into the picture and he falls after the Rings of Power were created that they become a whole other race under his domain. It's part of his Ring of Power control over them.
Yes, one ring to rule them all.
Well, yeah, but the subtler thing about it is the fact that his ring, besides the ability to control the other races' rings, creates the orc race as a separate race. Like, that's one of the things they didn't convey well in the movies. Is prior to Sauron, the orcs were a one-shot creation. So you're an elf, Ollie. I'm going to torture you for a couple hundred years. You're now an orc. Okay? I'm now Sauron. I torture you for a couple hundred years. You're now an orc that can breed with this other fuck that I tortured for a couple hundred years. And now you give birth to orcs, not elves. Huge difference.
Yes, that is a huge difference.
Yeah, because in the first age, there's an orc that gets redeemed because they're rescued by a Numenorian knight, and they're taken to a wood elf enclosure, and the wood elves do magic on them, and you find out that she's pregnant, and she gives birth to an elf, not an orc, even though she herself is an orc. See, huge difference there.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, like the Tolkien orcs are honestly just a retelling of goblins. And really, like the orcs that truly, I wish they'd made the difference in telling. Goblins are basically, in my view, the fall of elves. They turn into goblins. Orcs are what happened when you mix in human blood, because orcs are pretty much Uruk-hai. Like, that's what I think of when I think of an orc. A massive, strong creature that can wield a freaking bow that uses a goddamn centimeter thick bowstring. Like, that's insane. Like that's an orc in my mind. It can run all fucking night. It can eat anything. It's going to cut up its goblin friend and eat it because it's hungry. Like that's an orc. Goblins are more sniveling, conniving creatures, where orcs are more, I am powerful and in your face. That's one of the things that I really love in the mythological telling too, is the fact that while goblins will stab you in the back, orcs will chop your head off and eat you. Face toe to toe. Like that's the thing that makes them so fucking frightening, is the fact that they can stand there toe to toe with you. They don't need to use underhanded tricks to kill you, and then they'll eat you just to make good measure that you're fucked up. But yeah, no, I mean, like Tolkien orcs are really fascinating because it really depends on the book, because like the Hobbit book, it's completely interchangeable, orcs and goblins.
Yeah, isn't it also said in the books that it was the orcs that developed tunnel making for living underground away from light?
Yes. After Sauron corrupts them, the orcs start their long, drawn-out war with the dwarves, and that's one of the things that's driving the dwarves to extinction. And the whole reason why there are hill dwarves in Middle Earth is because they've been driven out of their minds, and that's part of why they're trying to take back the Lonely Mountain from Smaug, because there's no goblins there, and a dragon is possibly killable while an entire million-strong army of orcs is not. That's one of the things that I loved about the showing of Khazad-dûm, is that there's a great army of dwarves dead on the ground in their armor because orcs don't give a shit. It just left their shit on the ground and just left their corpses there. That's very, very goblin-esque. Where, like the Uruk-hais, for example, in their story, like the Uruk-hais, when they sack Rohirrim, they actually take the human equipment. They take it back to their forges to smelt it. They melt it down and remake it, because even though they're using shitty form-made kind of factory-made gear that's just pressed and done on an assembly line, it's leagues better than what you see on the orcs. Because orcs are using shit weapons that are crap, unless they're an orc leader like that gray orc that they had in one of the Hobbit movies. I think it was the second one, The Fall of Smaug, the one that's hunting the brown wizard and Gandalf, the gray.
Yeah.
The Warg Rider guy that lost an arm, that dude. Like, that guy had decent equipment. The rest of the orcs didn't. But the Uruk-hai have fantastic gear. It's all forged. It's all made properly. It all works properly. It's all brand new. And in the actual books, like the big thing that no one believes that the Uruks are real for a long period of time, because they're not finding any remains. They're not finding any corpses. They're not finding any history of them being there, except for the fact that everyone killed doesn't have any gear on them. They're stripped, which what makes them think that they're highwaymen. Well, they're that's a very.
We're kind of running out of time, though, so I'm going to squeeze in some of the etymology from Tolkien.
Absolutely, go ahead.
In Tolkien's Sindarin language, orc is orsh, plural irsh. In his late post-Lord of the Rings writings, he preferred the spelling orc, evidently mainly to avoid the form orcish, which would be naturally pronounced with the C as S instead of K. In Tolkien's languages, the letter C was always pronounced K. It is also possible that the word is common tongue version of Orcs, the Sindarin word for orc. The original sense of the word seems to be bogey or boogeyman, that is, something that provokes fear, as seen in the Quenya cognato urco, plural urqui. In the Old English, orc means demon. The term Uruk-hai merely means orc folk in the Black Speech, and was the Uruk-hai's name for themselves. Some of the other names they had were Gorgon, was the name that Gan-Buri-Gan of the wild men of the Druadan forest used for the orcs in their own language, or Irsh was the term used by Haldir and his brothers who were elves of Lothlorien. The same word was also used by Legolas, indicating that it is Sindarin.
Oof.
Yep, that's some of the etymology.
Yeah, no. Like that makes sense. I just, oof. Like I didn't realize that their name was actually Black Orc for themselves. I haven't actually read the Tolkien books in a long time. I should go back and reread them.
In the Black Speech, not Black Orc.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool because no, that's very nice.
Yeah, and we have kind of hit the 2-hour mark, actually.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Again, yeah, I'm sorry for the late start.
You're fine.
But yeah, no. If you want to do this again, just let me know because I love these mythological conversations. They're a lot of fun for me, and not a lot of people are interested in the actual history of where these things come from. And
I know. That's why we have this monthly stream.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot, and I'll gladly come back for another one because this was.
Do you have some last few words for the watchers, for the viewers?
Oh yeah. Remember, monsters are evil because they're going to eat UK. They're bad.
Okay. Bye, my fellow hootlings. See you again soon. Bye.